Hello and welcome to Misheard Song Lyrics Podcast. My name is Misheard, and we're going to be doing Season 3, Episode 114, second misheard song lyric that we're going to be doing about the Bee Gees, and it's with More Than a Woman. The misheard song lyric is bald-headed woman, and then the correct lyrics is more than a woman. Now, like I said earlier, this is our second misheard song lyric featuring the Bee Gees. We actually did one all the way back in Season 1, Episode 19, and it was with our guest, Matt C., and we did their song, You Should Be Dancing, so this is going to be fun. So for years, I always thought they were singing about a bald-headed woman. It really sounds like it. Now, for me, if I could get away with being bald, I would love it. But you have to know that you have a good shaped head, and you won't know that until you actually shave your head. And by that time, you'll know it was a good idea or it wasn't. So that's the hesitancy there. But I've seen many photos of models. I actually know of a really great model who went down the runway bald-headed. She looked gorgeous. She got the most applause. So it is something that, would be an interesting thing. So More Than a Woman, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the second misheard song lyric from the Bee Gees and a little bit about some things I didn't even know about this song. So yes, sung and performed by the Bee Gees. It was actually written by them too. So if y'all don't know, the Bee Gees consist of brothers, Barry, Robin, and Maurice Gibb. And it was made for the soundtrack to the film Saturday Night Fever, and also became a regular feature on their group live sets all the way from 1977 till unfortunately Maurice's death back in 2003, and was often coupled with Night Fever, so they would always put those together. So for those of you youngins who don't know who the Bee Gees are, let me just do a quick recap or synopsis of who they are. They are a music group formed back in 1958, featuring, I said, brothers Barry, Robin, and Maurice. And Robin and Maurice were fraternal twins, so twins that don't look the same. So for those of you that don't know that. The trio was very successful in popular music in the late 1960s, early 70s, and of course later in the 80s as well, early 80s, with the disco music era. So the mid to late 70s was kind of like their sweet spot. Although the oldest brother Barry did a lot of great solo songs as well as famous duets like with Barbra Streisand, a couple that are my favorite. They're known for their three-part tight harmonies, and Robin's, what they say, clear vibrato lead vocals were what helped them had a lot of earlier hits. And then Barry's R&B falsetto, which is very hard to sing as a male, became their signature sound during the mid to late 1970s and the 80s. I said earlier that they wrote all of their own hits, as well as writing, producing several major hits for other artists. So they were very smart people, because the money is when you make the music, really, the songwriting. And they actually have been referred to many times as the Disco Kings, which I would agree. So let's touch first on Saturday Night Fever, the actual movie that the song is in. So it's a 1977 American dance drama film directed by John Badham and produced by Robert Stigwood. Now, before Grease and Pulp Fiction was a thing, it starred a very young John Travolta as Tony Manero, this young Italian-American man from Brooklyn who spends his weekends dancing and drinking at the local disco or discotheque while dealing with social tensions, a lot of drama, and what they say, restlessness and delusionment of his life, and feeling like he's trapped in this working class neighborhood. So, dance hopefully will be his ticket out. The film definitely shows off the whole disco music around the time and made Travolta actually very well known. He was already getting, some being fame, I could say, when he was in that TV show Welcome Back, Kotter, and that gave him the household name, but this brought him to the next level, and of course a year later, Grease. He is also, from this movie, was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Actor. I did not know that, for his performance as Tony Manero. And he was at that time the 5th youngest nominee in this category. So some big awards there. John Travolta actually reprised his role as Tony Manero in the movie in 1983 called Staying Alive. I remember seeing that in the theaters. Crazy, at the old Westgate. It's no longer there in Beaverton, Oregon, in the United States. It was not loved by the critics, but it was a success in the box office. And I remember watching it there because we had to wait in line, and it was, I think, directed by Sly Stallone, and he makes an appearance in the movie, just a quick cameo. So the film itself, Saturday Night Fever, like I said, showed a lot of music, dancing, and it showed the subculture of the disco era. Had a lot of great songs, the couture, the fashion, and this was before AIDS, so a lot of sexual promiscuity, as they say, was shown in this movie. The soundtrack did very well. It did a lot of songs, actually featured a lot of songs by the Bee Gees, and is one of the best-selling soundtracks of all time. Did not know that. The next is the story. Where did it come from? It actually was based on an article by music writer Nick Cohen. Was first published in June of 1976 in an issue of New York Magazine. The article was called Tribal Rights of the New Saturday Night. And so let me just talk about that. I did some digging. That was the title. It was, like I said, in a 1976 New York Magazine article. The rock journalist Nick Cohen is British, and he used this as the plot and inspired the characters for now we know the movie Saturday Night Fever. And originally the article was published as a fact reporting, however, around the time when it hit its 20th anniversary of the film in 1996, Cohen said, actually it was a work of fiction, so here we go. So the story was, after persuading New York editor Clay Felker to let him write an article about the 1970s disco scene, Cohen, then a newcomer to the US coming from England, set about researching the American working class and subculture he was trying to cover. He says, or apparently one night he traveled to Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, to visit the disco, 2001 Odyssey, great name. However, when he arrived, there was a drunken fight that was taking place outside of the club, and one of the participants rolled over in the gutter and threw up on Mr. Cohen's trouser leg, which led him to return back to Manhattan. So even with this brief visit, he did notice that the scene was surveyed by one clubgoer standing in the doorway and calmly watching events. Cohen returned to this club subsequently, but the young man wasn't there. So to, I guess, overcome his novice of the New York disco scene, Cohen combined the image of the figure outside the club with people who he knew from his youth, including a gang member from the Northern Ireland city of Derry, apparently, where Cohen had grown up, and a young man he knew in England. He says, quote unquote, "My story was a fraud. Yikes. I'd only recently arrived in New York, far from being steeped in the Brooklyn street life. I hardly knew the place. As for Vincent, my story's hero, he was largely inspired by a Shepherd's Bush mod, so someplace in England, whom I've known in the 60s, and a one-time king of Gold Hawk Road." And for additional detail, Cohen returned to Bay Ridge during the day to get a better feel of the area. So he only had that brief encounter. He really didn't get himself all immersed in that subculture. And then on the 40th anniversary of the article's publication in 2016, Cohen said that he thought that such a fictionalized piece would not have been published in the contemporary press. Quote unquote, he said, "It reads to me as obvious fiction, albeit based on observation and some knowledge of the disco culture. No way could it sneak past customs now. In the 60s and the 70s, the line between fact and fiction was blurry. Few editors asked tough questions. For the most part, it was a case of don't ask, don't tell." There you go. So Saturday Night Fever was a huge commercial success and had a tremendous effect on the pulp culture of the late 1970s, especially in the music scene. And in 2010, Saturday Night Fever was deemed culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant by the Library of Congress and selected for the preservation in the National Film Registry. So there you go. It started off with kind of a lie by this British writer, and now it's all legit, and now it's going to be kept in the National Film Registry. So the recording background. The Bee Gees started to record it from February to March of 1977 in the, I'm going to screw it up, but it's the Chateau de Herville in Herville, France. Continued it in Criteria Studios in Miami of April and later in September. And then the song was finally finished in Cherokee Studios in LA. The soundtrack actually includes two versions. That I did not know too. One by the Bee Gees and the other by Tavares, which I love that group too. Both versions are featured in the film as well. The song has been recorded and performed by many other artists in different forms, but the Tavares one is pretty well known as well. The song by the Bee Gees was not released as a single in the US and the UK, but only in some other territories. Despite that, it remained staple on the radio at the time. It was one of the best known songs. And I guess there's a shorter version of the song performed by the Bee Gees in 1997 on both the DVD and CD versions of One Night Only. So if you have that, you're lucky to have that. The song has also been included in a lot of Bee Gee compilations, such as the Tales from the Brothers Gibb and their greatest hits, The Record. And in the very first British pressings of their greatest hits, the record featured the song with a mastering fault, good to know, with audio noticeably dipping to the right briefly during the first verse. This was corrected after several thousand copies have been distributed. So if you have that first original, that might be worth some money too. And like I said earlier with the cover, with Mike Tavares, they recorded it in 1977, so same year, and of course appeared also on the same soundtrack, which is interesting. It's also featured on their 1978 album called Future Bound, and then their version charted at number 32 on the US Billboard 100 and number 7 on the UK singles chart. So they did quite well as well. So for those of you who thought it was what I thought, it is not about a bald-headed woman, although that works too. It's more than a woman. And got to know a little bit more about John Travolta, his body of work, I guess, because, you know, he becomes a Scientologist and all that, a pilot, has kids, and several other good movies and not so good movies, Battleship Earth, by the way. If you have any great suggestions like this, Misheard, please send them to my email at misheard, misheard songs at gmail.com, or you can send us a note, DM us in Facebook, all our social, Twitter, as well as Instagram. We'd love to hear from you, and if you're good with it, we'll give you a shout out. But in the meantime, keep singing those songs wrong. Bye!